26 innocents slaughtered at a church in Texas, and the left didn't waste 1 second before politicizing the tragedy. The massacre at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas yesterday is a tragedy beyond words. 26 innocent people slaughtered for doing nothing other than worshiping on a Sunday morning, among them the 14-year-old daughter of the pastor and his wife. Our hearts, our thoughts, our prayers go out to these families, to these victims, to the entire community of Sutherland Springs, Texas. But that's not what today's show is about. Today's show is about the disgraceful political play by Democrats, by progressives, seconds after the incident jumped off. Guys like Richard Blumenthal and Chris Murphy, just these terrible, terrible Democrats in Congress who didn't waste a second. They didn't care about the victims. They were chomping at the bit. They were salivating to push their far-left radical agendas. Now, gun control is typically pushed through the lens of ignorance. Democrats, progressives are completely ignorant to firearms. They're ignorant to firearms law. They're ignorant to the criminal mind. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Take a look at this graphic on your screen. 2 rifles. The one on top would most likely be considered acceptable to Democrats. Looks like a hunting rifle, right? While the one on the bottom is an evil assault rifle. It should be banned. It should be banned from society. You should be a felon for merely owning one, a criminal. But those rifles function identically. The rifle on top is a Ruger Mini 14. It fires the .223 civilian 5.56 NATO round, as does the AR-15 style rifle on the bottom. Both rifles have semi-automatic action, semi-automatic firing mechanisms. Both rifles have interchangeable magazines. Now, the one on top happens to, in the photo, have a 5-round magazine that's flush with the stock, while the one on the bottom has a 30-round magazine. But the one on top can accept a 30-round magazine. The one on top can accept a drum magazine that holds hundreds of rounds. In other words, these rifles fire identical rounds and function identically. They have identical magazine capacity, depending on which magazine you choose to use. The only difference is aesthetic. Yeah, that's right. Democrats and progressives want to ban the rifle on the bottom because it looks different than the rifle on top, despite the fact that it having the same lethality, the same rate of fire, the same mechanical functionality. And when you set public policy through the lens of ignorance for 300+ million Americans, it's a slippery slope to total statism. It's terrible. Now, Democrats are also calling for gun laws. I tweeted yesterday, only Dems are dumb enough to think that a guy who willingly committed 26 counts of capital murder would be deterred by another gun law. Think about that for a second. This guy left his home to intentionally kill as many people as possible and tragically succeeded in killing 26 innocents. Yet Democrats think that if we had gun laws, he would have been deterred. But he, the killer, I didn't even want to say his name, Devin Patrick Kelly, this savage murderer, and it disgusts me that I have to utter his name. He proved them wrong with his own actions. See, he bought this firearm legally by committing a crime and lying on this form I have in front of me, the U.S. Department of Justice, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, Form 4473, also known as the Firearms Transaction Record. It's the form that everyone must fill out when buying a firearm in the United States through a federal firearms license holder. Now, he broke federal law when he lied on this form and signed it. And where he lied was in Section 11, first on subsection C, which asks, have you ever been convicted in any court of a felony or any other crime for which the judge could have imprisoned you for more than 1 year, even if you received the shortest sentence, including probation? He answered, no, that was a lie. That was a violation of federal law, because we now know that in 2014, he was convicted in a military court of felony domestic violence and served a year in confinement. He also lied on subsection G. Have you been discharged from the armed forces under dishonorable conditions? He said no. He was dishonorably discharged. So he committed a felony. He broke federal law by lying on and signing this form. Now, there appears to have been another breakdown. He also passed his NICS check. And what NICS is the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. That's the phone call that's made after you fill out this form when buying a gun to determine whether or not you have any criminal background that would disqualify you or prohibit you from owning. He passed that check. And that tells me, what that told me was something. So I spoke to some sources in the Department of Defense, and they concurred. It's being looked into. as to whether or not the Department of Defense properly shared his military court conviction information with the Department of Justice, with the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, because those are the databases that the NICS system taps to see whether or not you have a criminal record. It taps federal and state databases to make sure you're not what's called a prohibited person. So that system broke down. We have to do better there. But it also appears mental illness was at work here. See, this is a guy who was described as creepy, crazy, and weird by high school classmates. He was an atheist who preached atheism, and he walked into a church and killed innocents. So we have to look at mental illness. Now, the left is hysterical on social media and in traditional media today, saying Donald Trump rolled back all of these great restrictions Barack Obama had on the mentally ill. Donald Trump wants mentally ill people to have firearms. That's ridiculous. Look, I am the staunchest supporter and defender of the Second Amendment. Nobody wants mentally ill, homicidal, and even suicidal people to have firearms. We don't want people to hurt themselves any more than we want them to hurt and sadly kill others. That is not what Donald Trump rolled back. So you got to understand the Obama-era regulations disproportionately affected veterans, and in a very, very draconian way. What do I mean by that? Well, the crux of this was that veterans were returning from the war, many suffering PTSD, the vast majority suffering debilitating PTSD. So they saw this, and they would check themselves voluntarily in the PTSD treatment facilities. One of the stipulations was they had to surrender in most states, and according to the federal government, they had to voluntarily surrender their firearms because they were now undergoing treatment for psychological disorders. And they did. Now think about this. These were responsible people who served our nation in a deadly war zone. They came home. They said, there's something psychologically wrong with me. I want to be cured. I want to be 100% again. I'm going to follow all the rules. I'm going to voluntarily surrender my weapons. I'm going to voluntarily go for my psychological treatment. And many of these people emerged from that treatment 100%. It happened to a very good friend of mine who was in the Navy. The problem is that there was no path to firearms rights restoration for these people. There still isn't. In simple terms, they voluntarily surrendered their guns. They followed the law. They followed all the rules. And when they were deemed 100% by a doctor, many of these people are working in the government. Many of them have security clearances, secret and top secret. My friend who went through this had a top secret security clearance at the Center for Disease Control. Now he's a finance manager at a major corporation. Yet he still cannot get his firearms back because there is no legal path to do it. It's not that he's deemed psychologically unfit. It was just something that was missed. There was no legal mechanism. Now, many veterans are hunters and recreational shooters, so when they started to hear this, they opted to not get PTSD treatment rather than walk around for life with the stigma of not being able to own firearms, not being able to hunt with their family or go recreationally shooting with their friends. It was a terrible, terrible oversight on the part of the Obama administration. The Trump administration realized the problem and rolled it back until the entire system could be fixed. And many, many people are looking into how to prevent the mentally ill from obtaining guns. The problem with this guy, even though with Kelly, was even though he was described as creepy, crazy, and weird by high school classmates, that's not grounds for civil commitment. There's nothing illegal about being creepy or crazy or weird in the non-clinical sense. You can't just civilly commit somebody if they don't commit an act that warrants it. Now, he beat his wife, and he did a year in jail, in military prison, for doing so. But for simply being a weird guy, where we still live in America, you can't just scoop somebody up and throw them into an insane asylum for being creepy, crazy, and weird. And so we have to also live with the fact that these events will happen because that's human nature. But we do have to do better with regard to evaluating mental illness and putting provisions in place that prevent these people from getting firearms while not allowing it to be used arbitrarily like it was under the Obama administration. Make no mistake, the Obama administration wanted to paint mental illness with a very broad brush as a backdoor gun grab. And so I'm very torn on this issue, and I'm going to wait for the experts to provide much more information before we start talking about public policy, because this one really bites into the heart of the Second Amendment. And look, nobody ever again wants to see a tragedy where dozens are killed, but it's going to happen because there are bad people in the world. If Kelly didn't have a gun, he might have used a truck, as the terrorists did in New York City days before. He might have used a bomb. He might have used a knife. There are plenty of ways to kill people. You don't need a gun. And criminals do not follow the law. Again, this guy killed 26 people, 26 counts of capital murder. Luckily, he's dead. And we think he was killed by a good guy with a gun, the kind of person these progressives would have chosen to disarm. A neighbor engaged him in gunfire. It stopped the massacre, The neighbor and another neighbor, then that neighbor and another neighbor, then pursued him in a vehicle. And when they found him, his car had run into a ditch and he was dead in the vehicle. Now, it's still unknown whether he killed himself or the Good Samaritan's shots contacted him were fatal. But law enforcement in the area, I spoke to a couple of people in law enforcement, they're leaning toward the Good Samaritan engaging him and causing the fatal wounds. But let's wait on that for the official report. Progressives would have chosen to disarm the good guy. They would have chosen to allow this massacre to continue because there were no armed good guys in the area. If progressive policies were enacted, how many would be dead? How many innocents would be dead? We have no idea. We have no idea, but it tells me one thing. Gun control is absolutely not the answer to violent crime. If you find segments like this as important as I do, and I'm sure you do if you're watching this show, please subscribe to our premium service at www.therebel.media/shows. If you're already a subscriber, thank you very much. I'll be back with you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.